say something about this?
I don't know what else to say. The chair hasn't given us very good instructions for this,
No.
has he?
Okay.
What are we supposed to talk about?
We're talking about secondary cities. Whoever.
Okay.
Okay. All right, great. So this panel is a panel session on secondary cities and spatial data infrastructure. And I thought that I would show a infograph that I successfully chopped in half using my cropping skills in PowerPoint. It comes from the Wilson Center. Sort of infograph on what secondary cities are, sort of for the benefit of the audience as they think about the questions they would like to ask. And since you guys can't see the screen, I've provided you a printout for what they are looking at. Yeah, I went to the secondary city site for the state and I stole text from that. For those, just to recap, secondary cities are the fastest growing urban areas in developing countries experiencing unplanned growth and development. These cities are unique environments that have been generally been poorly mapped with limited data and information on infrastructure, land tenure, and planning. The importance of open source mapping for this project, the importance of open source mapping is to help data poor, underdeveloped, and rapidly growing cities build their capacity by enlisting local efforts and initiatives to locate and generate data in collaboration with their municipalities. So I'd like to begin with this context with the panel introducing themselves. We'll give just about 5 minutes tops for each person to speak about their view or their background in this matter. Go ahead, Lee.
Again?
Again.
All right, well, first of all, that definition you read is how we at the Department of State for our project define secondary cities. I don't think there's no hard and true definition of secondary cities, but I think it's important to understand that this is a functional definition. There's no size parameters. So a secondary city in China is obviously very different from a secondary city in Ecuador. I might talk about our project maybe a little bit later, but I think what I'd like to introduce from the perspective I have as a Department of State government official who advises policymakers is, interestingly enough, at the State Department, there is nobody in charge of urbanization. We talk about urbanization as one of the major challenges of our time, and in a department which has been criticized for the number of special envoys that we have. There's a special envoy for almost anything you can think of over the past decade. There's never been anybody who's in charge of urbanization. So it's a real challenge to know where to fit a lot of these problems associated with rapidly growing urban areas and potential for all sorts of things from harboring terrorists to new ways of viewing agriculture and services. If there's nobody who's providing any direction for that. And it's also, I think, very difficult to engage with organizations internationally, such as the World Food Program and FAO and others, when there's no really policy on food in urban areas and the like. So I just wanted to introduce that our office is trying to figure out how to fit urban challenges into all of the other parts of the Department of State that does have a functional and regional bureau. So how are urban challenges associated with refugee crisis, associated with health issues, associated with human rights, so on and so forth. And so when we're doing this, we're finding that If we're dealing in the major cities, the capital cities, the large cities, the more modern cities, we have pretty good data. We generally have pretty good data or a way to get data. Whereas a lot of the cities that are in areas that are growing rapidly, in some cases almost overnight, there's a real lack of data to start with. So a lot of the new tools that are coming into play for participatory mapping and remote sensing, I think have even more value when they're going into areas that are experiencing rapid change, because it's kind of boring to use those tools for areas that aren't changing that much. So I think it's a nice marriage between the spatial, temporal, remote sense types of tools and techniques that we have and the in situ measurements we can get in areas where we don't have data or that are changing rapidly. So I think that's enough by way of introduction.
So I'm Josh Lieberman. I'm senior researcher, this and that with CGA, and sometimes teacher, and also do a lot of work with the Open Geospatial Consortium. So I'm going to concentrate on the second part of that title, which was spatial data infrastructure. So there is a very large, noble tradition of spatial data infrastructure, of building the authoritative data for cities and regions and countries, and that involves, making detailed, rigorous observations, doing surveying, increasingly using remote sensing. But then there's a process where that becomes features and then is blessed as authoritative features. And the part that comes after that is usually, okay, that's what you should care about. We're the government and we're giving you this data, or sometimes we're selling you this data, and you should trust it. Maybe there's some metadata about the level of precision and so on, but that's it. And that works great when you have the infrastructure to produce spatial data infrastructure. So the characteristic of these secondary cities is that infrastructure doesn't exist, and therefore the data infrastructure that bureaucracy and industrial base, for example, might be creating also doesn't exist. When it does exist, then you have observations of a variety of sorts, and sometimes they're sporadic, they're incomplete, they will conflict with one another. And so what that means for a spatial data infrastructure is that it needs to be maintained where it came from, much more efficiently and durably. So the observations, the imagery, for example, that streets were drawn from, you need to hold on to that, because it might be contradicted or superseded by the next set of imagery. So in terms of an infrastructure that is informal, is crowdsourced, or at least diversely sourced, that technical need is really to keep the observations and the resulting features together, to really be able to have an ongoing weight of evidence process. Too often, I think, when there is some data collection, it's a project. Very often it's an academic project or, one initiative, and then it's over, and the data only covered what the data covered, and it was only good at the time it was collected. And so that results in two requirements for an infrastructure that can serve these sorts of secondary cities. One is that it is live, so that it can continually make these optimizations and improvements, that it also is able to incorporate rapid feedback. When you have, these matatu inputs, okay, these are where they go. In, even younger, more rapidly growing places, those routes keep changing. So how do you get feedback from people, judge it, and get the best result from that? There's two other pieces to that, though. One is that you actually need, in a sense, greater rigor to be informal than to be formal. Because when you're formal, you have people who understand a tradition of a certain level of data quality and so on, and are in a position where they have, for example, institutional knowledge to bring data together. Where you have whoever contributes. That's actually when you really need standards and open practices that people can buy into. That's one of the reasons why OpenStreetMap has been very successful, is that anybody can log on to HOT and start contributing, because there's very clear and pretty rigorous standards for, okay, this is how you add data, this is who is going to check it, this is how it's going to show up, this is when it's going to change. So those standards and practices actually need to be even more clear and more straight in an informal situation. The other, which is the challenge maybe for us here, is that these situations really are spatiotemporal. We're dealing with data which is changing. The characteristic of it is both in its quality and in the ground that it's representing. The constant is change. And so you have the two needs. One is to have a process that accommodates that change, and the other, which may be even more difficult, is to communicate that change. Say, here is the data, and here was the data differently last week, and it'll be different next week. And so I think we have to sort of support secondary cities by really coming up with better ways to communicate the status in the process of change, whether that's making more use of visual narratives or other means of interactivity. I think that's a big challenge for having infrastructure that accommodates these informal urbanizations. Finally, the reason for this, I think, that we kind of tend to forget about, and this is the question about urbanization, is, the characteristic of urban areas is that those services that are offered in common and taken part of in common just become so much more important with the density of population. So, and those services increasingly, to be effective, are data-driven. So that connection between connecting that information to how people are able to live in the city is another aspect of the feedback loop that we should strive to create in those situations. Yeah.
So I'm Xuan from University of Arkansas. Before I went to University of Arkansas, so I was I worked in West Virginia GIS Technical Center and the Center for GIS at Georgia Tech. So both centers host the statewide GIS data clearinghouse. So I think I can share some experience and observations I get from the centers, and I think that may be useful for the secondary cities in developing countries. Within the GIS data clearinghouse, I think the most important issue is all the stakeholders, they would like to share their data. So in this case, the data infrastructure is an open facility, and then in this case, whether we build the data infrastructure in either a top-down approach or bottom-up approach, and standard, that's the critical issue here. So there are a lot of issues relevant to the interoperability initiatives in federal Spatial Data Committee, FGDC, OGC, so a lot of standards are available, but in practice, I think we heard a discussion at this workshop. Not everybody just follow the standard. So in this case, for example, we should be able to get spatial and temporal information from the metadata, but in practice, some people just release data without, format metadata information. Then there is an issue in the usability here. So, for example, we heard the presentation in this conference as well. So how can we search the data and get whatever I want? So a lot of information are not relevant or not formatted in a standard way. Then even we develop semantic solutions or develop ontology or whatever, but eventually, there are still such usability issues. And for data infrastructure, particularly in developing countries, sustainability may be a critical issue as well. And even in this country, in the state of Georgia, when the state cut the budget, the data clearinghouse just closed. So there is no further maintenance, then, that can be a big problem in this area. And eventually, once we have a lot of data, such as both in West Virginia and Georgia, so the centers, they would like to provide the service. So we have data, we want to serve the data to the public. And then, the most straightforward approach is just provide a website so everybody can download that. But eventually, they would like to develop web portal, web service. So in this case, there are a lot of user interaction, communication issues, because the user community, they have different requirements. And then there are a lot of information exchange, such as when I was in West Virginia, we almost have monthly meeting. So we travel from Morgantown to Charleston and communicate with government agencies. So what do you want to do? And they may keep changing their ideas, as you mentioned. So, so that's I think this experience will benefit for the secondary city initiatives in the developing countries.
I got several slides. Can I show you? I got several slides.
Oh, okay.
So maybe I can step here. Thank you.
For some reason, I can't see the screen here, so I'll have to, should I be brave and just pull it? Sounds good.
I just made several slides. I want to share some of my experience in China's secondary cities construction, information construction. Okay. Does it work?
Now we're having the same problems.
Okay.
It is.
It doesn't matter. I can just report it.
I'll work on it while you continue talking.
Yes,
I'll help you, but I'm not very.
Hello, everyone. I'm coming from Peking University. It's my great honor to be as a panelist here. Yes, it's come out. So I'm an associate professor. My research field is 3D GIS and visualization, emergency response, and the digital mine, and like this, smart city a little bit. Today, our topic is secondary cities, so I want to share some of my experience on smart city construction in China. And as we all know, just yesterday, the Dr. Peng Li, he is coming from the National Bureau of Surveying and Mapping Geo Information. He's a deputy administrator. He mentioned We in China government has established the NSDI, that's its National Spatial Infrastructure Information System, and also there are more than 300 provincial, 300 regional level cities, and more than 500 county city has constructed. Yes. Okay. This is our research institute. We have 30 faculty. I will skip it quickly. We have some research area about remote sensing, GIS, and satellite navigation. And actually, I'm working on the second one, some of this. And I just skip it. So I just check on Wiki. The secondary city often follows as a primate city and can be seen in the urban hierarchy. So as China are concerned, they're actually the secondary cities usually to be the province capital, that is Xi'an, Shenyang, or Zhengzhou, something like this. But in Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and they are the biggest city. They are primate city. So I just continue the Bureau of National Surveying and Mapping and Geoinformation Construction about the national spatial infrastructure. Their start began in 2006. And until now, I just check on the website, there are more than 300 provincial, regional level city and county level city build this NSDI. And this is the TND2 system, also called World Map. It's a officially map services system. And also on it, we development many applications about environment, land use, and population analysis, something like this. Actually, as we all know, the cloud computing, high performance computing are all very is very popular right now. So they want to promote this platform into a so-called smart city spatial temporal platform. They want to promote it. So right now there are maybe 10 or 20 cities are engaging in promote such platform. But this is not it's only a minor job for Bureau of Mapping and Surveying Geoinformation. Another very huge project about smart city is proposed by Ministry Housing and Urban Rural Development since 2011. So they have several stages. The first, they think we should make a top design of what's a smart city in China, and then we make some technological demonstration, and then we make some application. Until now, to this year is 2017, right? So until now, this project is continuing, but it's not very popular because they proposed another project called a characteristic city. So how about this project? So in first stage, there are, sorry for Chinese map, because they have 19 cities. I think the 19 cities is most secondary cities, even third level city, to join in this project, to apply it. So what they do for smart city, they just build the sensors and build a network, build a spatial temporal platform, and build various applications. I think the mainly achievement, maybe two parts. The first part is they spend millions money on working for a study center, build the basic information structure. You can see this, there are many cities work on this one. And another, I think, is various innovation. According to this center, maybe this is a demo. Oh, sorry. This is the demo we this year we built for Dongsheng, Dongsheng city. We can see from this interface, we collect most of their application system into a home platform and show for their leaders or the users to show the basic safety situation about this city. They have some coal mine, they have some chemical factory, they have some transportation, fire station, and even some important buildings. They just want to watch every aspect of this city, so that they collect various systems data in this data center. And on the right side, there's some curves to show if it's normal. If not more normal, they just do analysis and give warning. But unfortunately, this kind of we call the work safety running monitoring system and emergency response platform, something like this, didn't consider the VGI's information. They just they are really reliable. Nobody can lie to the government, right? So they just connected the government what they want and show on the platform. This is I think the first the city government build this center, and they connect various systems into it and do a lot of analysis. The second, I think, the various innovation application to facilitate common people's life. And the last topic, I'm not finished. I think we should open our mind to think why China proposed another term called the characteristic of the town. I think as we can think, Beijing or Shenzhen, they have very large population. The government want people to keep in balance. The population cannot grow too fast. So they think a lot of policies to element or to let people go to the small cities, to secondary cities. So a good example is our graduate student. Right now, the half of graduate students don't choose the primary city. They just go to the secondary city to seeking job or work on it, because their living standard will be lower as the biggest city. So as I think another aspect is the small town will attract talent people or attract more investment more than big cities. So our government maybe want to make some change on this to make all the city hierarchy balance more. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe I talk too much.
No, thank you. So great opening comments. I feel like I've already learned quite a bit more about secondary cities than when I started. Let's take some time now to throw it to the audience and see if there are any questions that you guys are dying to ask.
Yeah, I have a question especially for Ni, but I think this is also related to everyone. Your topic is about transforming the scientific research or science into the policy side so that it can be taken as actionable information. From your experience, so this could be for everyone. How to make the scientific information or whatever information actionable? What is your advice for us to either on the visualization side or the information is better to be understood? What are the principles or guidance you have?
I think related to secondary cities, one of the most important things is that all the data have to be available. So all the partners agree that all the data is publicly available, and there's a partnership between local government, NGOs, and universities. So I think that transparency ensures that the government is held accountable if the population has the same access to the information that the governments have. As a matter of fact, we have some instances in the secondary city projects where the government has made information available to this project that previously it protected because it realized they had a certain sense of corporate social responsibility once they joined this project. Also, the provision of commercial satellite imagery helps sustain the project because for a lot of less developed cities, that's a very large expense. And if we can keep just that going, it continues work among graduate students and helps sustain the project if we can keep providing new imagery for new parts of the city. So those are two ways I think that we can try to translate this into actionable decision-making by local governments and citizens together.
I think there's an element of a lot of data doesn't get released because of fear of misuse. And so that translation, I think, often involves characterizing the confidence with which scientific conclusions or data is held and then matching it to the sort of decisions or uses that are appropriate for it. And so that, I think, often translates into saying, okay, we have this data set, and what we'd like to do is to expand the experimentation with it, not to say this is true and correct, make some laws and on the basis of it, but to use it to expand the partnership of working with the data.
So many of the talks we've heard have to do with population data and the granularity of population data. And one of the talks yesterday talked about housing, buildings, mapping the world of all the buildings. I think that's being done by Oak Ridge, was discussed. Do you think that in the future the possibility of using structures as a proxy for the potential for estimating population based on the structures as a potential for getting granularity? You can get imagery of an area and then you can you can pull out the number of structures and then using that as a proxy as a way of getting more granularity for looking at the delta changes that you're looking for as a potential?
You want it? You're the 3D mapper.
Maybe you first.
No, please.
I can say that we are doing that.
Yeah.
So we are using any available LiDAR data or geographic imagery to get the heights of buildings that we can, to the degree that we can. And then we're using another team doing sociocultural knowledge about how facilities are used in those cultures and what kinds of data are used, to what extent, sort of leveraging those two together to come up with a very localized, yes, with a fair amount of uncertainty, which we're trying to work the model with uncertainty as well in estimating the population.
Yeah, the problem with extracting small-scale data like that is that you need small-scale ground truth.
I think it's going to be a race between structures and cell phones, frankly. And I think the cell phone's going to win.
We don't own the cell phone.
And actually, I think there is a data privacy issues in this initiative because for today, everybody can search online from Zillow, Redfin, so your property information is available. And at the county level, the parcel data, the ownership, the owner's name, whatever, all the information are publicly available. So when we hope to get the open data, but there are a big issue in the privacy in this case.
I do support Professor Shi, because you know, in China I have known actually the 3D buildings data are all collected by the internet enterprises such as Tencent, or they spend millions and millions of money working on it, but they cannot release it. They are talking with the Bureau of Survey and Mapping and Information, but the government think it's too sensitive because the data is too precise. So if we released all the 3D models on the internet, everybody can check. Maybe it's uncontrollable, so they refuse to release it.
I understand. I believe that the data that's going through Secondary Cities project under State Department is interoperable. I think they're often using a platform called GeoNode. Is the data on, is it MapWorld? Is MapWorld the name of the platform you mentioned? Is that interoperable or available for download? Is it exposed via map services, or is it available for download?
This world map is, it's actually is a different version. There are maybe, right now they have two versions. The first version is for general publics. So everybody can log their website and they use it, and just like Google or Baidu, Baidu Maps.
So there's an open
Yes,
API?
It's open, and it has APIs. Everybody can secondary development on it for mobile, for desktop, anything for that.
And
But
data regarding secondary cities is
sure.
available over the API?
Yes,
Okay.
I take courses to compare with the world map with the Google and Baidu, and maybe the function is not so good, but the data is valuable.
Are you using web feature services?
Yes, sure.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Great.
And I have mentioned there are a second part for this platform. It's also open for government. So if government have their own application, they just work on this platform and build their own. But the data is different. Because general public, maybe there's some secret data, they filter it. But for a government, they have more data or something like this. Yeah.
I was curious from the panel if you could discuss a little bit about informal versus formal settlements in secondary cities, like thinking of shanty towns or slums. And I've just come across some really interesting examples, like the Cabrera slum that Penn State had a video about, and I think it's the Pune slum in India. How can we integrate these other sources that maybe the government doesn't approve of into, like legitimate, more authentic secondary city, data structures?
Very quickly, the projects that we select are based in large part on imagery change detection, and that imagery change detection will pick up almost all these shantytown and informal settlements, and they are usually a core feature of any mapping we do under the Secondary Cities Initiative. The governments have to agree to the project and to share information on that, which in a place like Cabrera, they're reluctant to do because of implications for that. But it's a strong focus of what we'd like to do with our project.
I think a big part of that really is the basis for the use of data for those areas. And that's in services to the people who live there. And so the big challenge with that is, one, they're usually very poor, although they're very needy of services. So, you have to have a big enough scale. And the other is, how do you get to them? And increasingly, that appears to be phones. You know, there's this amazing penetration of even smartphones and little penetration of anything else. So you have that sort of, you know, eye of the needle that all of this data collection and then, you know, provision of services on the basis of it has to go through.
We have been talking about the data side. I have a question regarding the technology side. So for secondary cities, it's different from the major cities that we're building. And we may be lack of data sources or have difficult accessing those data sets because of privacy and other issues. But on the technological side, what do you think as the latest technologies, either on the sensing side or like AI deep learning for extracting information from the data, or maybe some kind of smart framework which could integrate all kinds of spatial temporal data sets together? So what do you think, for example, your top one or top two technologies that could help build the SDI for secondary cities?
You know, I think it's tricky to say because I think each city is unique, and we do training for all of our partners depending on the identified desires and needs of our the local cities. So we train in proprietary GIS and open source GIS. We have smartphone survey capabilities and you know, more laptop-based capabilities. But I would say, surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, most of our partners have wanted to use proprietary GIS, even though we train them on open source, and despite the investment and the fact that they're in less developed areas, number one. Number two, they all seem to have local cell phones that they want to use, as opposed to us providing a particular particular phone loaded up with all of the, you know, applications and survey tools, for instance. So that surprised us a little bit. We were ready to come and provide, you know, dozens of cell phones for them to use, and they'd rather use their own phones with apps that were downloadable and adaptable. And then I think what they really need then mostly is the imagery processing capabilities. That seems to be what I think is lacking technologically in a lot of the places, and storage as well.
So one technological aspect I think maybe reflects the accretionary nature of the secondary cities development is that there's very rarely somebody who's saying, okay, I'm in charge, or I have the view of this entire city. And even if they do, then, you know, 6 months later, there's a whole new area that was not what they considered their whole view. So, and the, you know, people who've gone and sort of had data-driven projects in many of these areas, they find that, you know, people are acting locally. They're concerned about their neighborhood, they're concerned about, you know, maybe a larger region, but they're all smaller pieces of what we would look at and say, there's this whole secondary city. So a process that can be really sort of federated like that starts from, you know, a sort of a neighborhood level of data exchange and services, and then is able to federate from there and be resilient in the way that it moves and increases, seems like it would be more successful. And so however that's reflected in, for example, the data infrastructure that supports it, I think that is a very important characteristic.
Okay. So I think we're a little past our time, but before we go, I thought I'd pose one final sort of wrap-up question. For those of us in the audience that may be interested in pursuing an engagement with a secondary city, are there any pitfalls that we should be aware of? What are the challenges? who in these secondary cities is sort of reaching out for help? Is it the city government? Is it local passionate city people? What's the experience? Maybe to narrow that, how do you select your projects, for example, for secondary cities, Lee?
Well, first of all, I have a bunch of brochures I will leave at the desk up top if anybody wants to find out more information. This is pretty parochial to our project. I've learned the hard way that if we don't work through our embassies on such projects, it's hard to get this done. So we actually we start with our embassies and our environment, science, and technology officers in those embassies to propose a project and identify potential local partners. Then we want a triad between local government, NGOs, and universities. And if we don't have a commitment from all three, we don't think we have a likelihood of success. I think the universities have the sustainability, the governments have some capacities, and the NGOs have a certain degree of independence. And then lastly, we're developing regional groupings. So for each of our cities, we have 10 cities now, we're going to expand to 15 or 20. We're going to have the regional groupings work on their own to expand their projects, so sort of train the trainers. And we're already finding that the groupings are starting to share apps and widgets and best practices among themselves. So it has a sort of an organic growth as well. So those are the best practices that we've discovered in 2 years.
Any final comments?
So actually, for the secondary city project, what kind of database for those projects they would like to use? Is that under a central system, or is it managed by different countries?
It's all managed on a GeoNode, and it's on a central website, and it's federated out to each of the individual cities as well. And we have training materials and information that you can download from the web to describe how that process works.
Well, thank you very much for an excellent discussion. Great views from different angles on this interesting problem. Thank the audience for their questions, and I guess that will wrap up this part, but I think Phil may have instructions for us as to what to do next. Let's give the panelists a round of applause. Thank you.
Let me project this first. Yeah, just want to add something for next two sessions and also the breakouts. Let me show the. Oh, you can. That's great. Yeah, I'll just unplug this and plug it back. Does it come up? Okay, great. So, yeah, right after this. Yeah, we can have a coffee break for about 10 minutes and then have two breakout sessions. One is on D1, another one is D2. And right after that, we have the breakout session 1A and session 1-2. What we're going to do is that please stay in the same room. And for those two sessions, we have two persons help us graciously serve as the chair for that. One is Dr. Matt Rice, so he's over there, and also Robert is going to help us continue this, moderate this dialogue. But from these two breakouts, what we want to find out is what are the questions and challenges, problems you want to be solved in terms of spatial temporal computing, secondary cities, SDI, social media, or whatever questions or challenges you think worth address in this field. And after that, we can try to group them into different categories. And then hopefully tomorrow we can come back to talk about what are the assets we already have to address those problems. And then what are the remaining ones we need to spend more time to do research. And after the breakout, we're going to get into the reception directly. For the reception part, it's from 5:35 to about 7:30. And we have the best paper. announcement from Dr. Keith Clark. And also we have poster and demos coming up, so that's the exciting part. For the demo and poster part, we have 4 posters signed up, but it's not in the system yet. But, so please put in the title here. And for the demos, please also put in there. I know we have one from Robert's group from Oak Ridge, maybe one from Ben, you can do what my plan. And we have a few others. So I think one on smart data discovery, another one on cloud computing platform. So we're going to have some exciting moments to discuss and interact. Thank you. And let's take a break for coffee.
Before?
Might have been.
I think
Nice
maybe
meeting you.
we have a big data proposal many years ago.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So we, the CTO.
Sorry, I thought I.
Oh, no, it's not a problem. In fact, this afternoon we're quite flexible, especially on the breakout.
George,
Okay,
first
I
of all,
usually, I usually like to keep to my time slot, but I got confused.
both, okay.
Right, right. So I think maybe 5 years ago.
Okay.
We do breakout, people hosting.
Yeah, so I do
Don't
sort of
speak
freelance
Ah.
member, but
Are you going to be back in
this
here
project and
afternoon?
that project.
No, not this afternoon.
Okay.
Hard to keep
I
track
know
of.
you'll be back tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm going to bring my own laptop tomorrow, so if anything needs to go on it.
Oh,
So Windows 7, probably not. The
thank you.
best
Yeah,
operating
first
system.
day for the welcome, I can ask you my movie on this one.
Yeah, oh, really? Yeah. I think,
Can't help my.
yeah, just, that wouldn't be
Yeah,
allowed.
yours will- so,
Yeah, I know.
But,
That's great, thank you. It's great to see all these applications and policy, especially, you know, so it tells the real story behind the.
Yeah, it would be nice if we could tell it more effectively.
Oh, yeah.
That's the challenge. So labor.
Yeah.
I'm about to bring them up top here. Code reviews.